Carbonneau, Executive Director of McLean Project for the Arts. I am so thrilled to welcome you on behalf of our MPA Board and my colleagues to what is the last of our MPAartfest Meet the Artist series. It's been a fantastic 2 weeks. If you've missed any of it, please know that you can go to our website under Events section and find the link to each of the past 2 weeks worth of Artfest Artist Talks. It's been a special treat this year when we're usually in the park and busy during the day. We don't have time to spend this much quality time with each of the MPAartfest artists, but what's more is we never have the time to be with them in their studios. This one-on-one format has given us a terrific opportunity to understand the medium, the motivations, and the work of all of our MPAartfest artists. Tonight, you have a terrific pleasure of being with Joe Wetzel. Joe is a former MPA board chair, and we talked him into staying on the board, thank goodness, even after that. He's an artist himself, he's a developer, and he has supported the arts throughout the region in a way that's made a material difference for all of us, especially MPA. Joe has time tonight with Arthur Kwon Lee, with Clare Winslow, and Patricia Goslee. We thank you for being with us, and before we go, please let me take a special moment to thank BOA, the design, build, and remodeling experts here in McLean, who focus on delivering remarkable client solutions and superior customer experiences. Their commitment to the community and to the arts has made them a wonderful partner for MPA for almost all of the 32 years that they've been in the region. BOA, we thank you, and to the MPAartfest community, thank you for being with us. It's been a really wonderful and highly successful first foray into a virtual Artfest world.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Wetzel. I'm a board member at the McLean Project for the Arts and founder and operator of the figure drawing program there, and here to welcome Arthur Kwon Lee, participant in this year's Artfest, our 14th Artfest. Arthur is in New York, although he used to be down here. Arthur bolted, it seems like yesterday, Arthur, but
yeah.
Was it about a year and a half ago?
It's been about a year and a half, yeah.
Arthur made the big leap, sort of like the actor going to Hollywood to be discovered in the soda fountain whose name I've forgotten about. But it's worked out pretty well for you, hasn't it? I mean,
yeah, so far so good.
Very
yeah, you know, the idea, you know, it's funny because they say it takes, you know, a couple of years to get a solo show with a respected gallery and all that, and I've, you know, within a year and a half, I've had 4 solos, and I have 2 more in line, and I won Artist of the Year, and I'm getting a lot of PR in conjunction to all that, so it's coming along for sure.
That's a great thing.
Yes.
And do you miss us back here at all, Arthur?
Oh, I miss you right now, Joe. I want to do some charcoal drawing with you as we speak. You can take some out.
Well, for those of you who aren't familiar with Arthur's work, just like his step into New York, which was nothing except really bold, Arthur's work is very bold and large as well. I mean, a small piece for Arthur, right, is maybe 2 foot by 3 foot. I've seen you work on things that are 5 feet by 10 feet, it seems, or larger, really not transportable. And they're all full of life. They're all full of color from one edge to the other. There's no pause or hesitation in either your application of the colors or the finished product. How is that? Do you have more room to work up in New York? I mean, physically more room? How do you handle things that big?
So, I mean, I had a studio in Adams Morgan when I was down in McLean, and that studio was actually, you know, because of this cost per square foot, you know, you're paying premium being in the city. So right. It was much bigger, especially because it was I was also paying to a patron. So we had something worked out where it was really flexible. But now I would say my studio is a third of the size, but it's still a large studio. I'm gonna still show you guys around. I'll do a little studio tour here.
Cool.
But it's still it's a lot smaller in scale. But yeah, I make a lot of big work, you know, which can often be hard to sell. But it's a studio conviction of mine to try to challenge myself. You know, that there's the discipline of being in that tunnel vision and of the game, of the art world, right? So I'm trying to always make work that I feel like is you know, high enough to be challenging, you know what I mean, but low enough to feel like I have mastery in it. There's just that nice tension.
Well, I think you've mastered, you know, there's every artist needs a certain comfort level. I mean, some artists draw and redraw the same bottle, what seems like over and over again. And if somebody were to look at it quickly, it's saying they're drawing the same bottle over and over again. But sometimes you really need that repetitiveness of certain aspects of it to be able to explore other more subtle aspects of it. And I think your work is a big embodiment of that. Anyone who gives it even the quickest glance, and anybody who's watching now can take a moment to visit either Arthur's website or our virtual studio here. You will see the little bits of repetitiveness that are necessary so that Arthur can then take the next step right next to it. And it's really easy to see in your work how you explore without starting all over again. And I think you actually get a lot further when you do your exploration that way. You can see it in your work. How do you?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is so important for all artists, but for me, those identifiable traits take form with the saturation of color in conjunction to the diversity of mark making, whilst sort of exploring the symbolic language of meta narratives and mythologies. This is something that's always interested in me. On top of the formalism, there's that contextualism. So I'm always sort of excavating that rabbit hole of Jungian archetypes and comparative religion in a way. That's just a subject matter that I've sort of decided to nest myself in regards to that consistency towards marketing the artist. That's definitely something that I'm, locked in.
Explain that a little, Arthur, for the anybody who's just dropped in, because the imagery that's apparent in your work is not necessarily apparently that exploration. You're very, very subtle in inserting that so that it's not a great big slap in the face. How do you manage that delicate balance? Uh-oh, on the spot. I put him on the spot.
Yeah, because I don't know if I would say it's delicate, because my work has a lot of tension, you know, in regards to the color, my decision of the color combination and how much gesture is, like the figures are sort of born out of this gestural looseness. So there's a lot of tension in the work. And I'm very conscientious of that. And I think that's just a part of my voice, and that's a part of my style. Just having that high synergy of, I mean, I'll say originally it was me exploring my identity as a Korean American. I feel like all artists are sort of cultural sommeliers. They're sort of sharing who they are with all the different things in their lives. And when I was in art school, I was exploring origins of Eastern and Western philosophy. That's what it was at first. But then the deeper I went, you come across Joseph Campbell, Alan Watts, a bunch of these thinkers that really influenced me towards kind of doing something more universal and cosmopolitan in a way. So I'm kind of doing figures all across the board. The paintings that you'll see in this art fest are in my style, but I would say in particular some of my other works that may not be included in this showcase show what I just said a little bit more blatantly. But
right.
that's something that I'm really interested in, because it's a very humbling and challenging subject matter for me.
And these newer pieces are more or less subtly exhibiting that.
I think well, let me first say that's an important point to also mention. These paintings are newer pieces. They have a different. They're subtly different from other works that you might see that were made in earlier years. I would say it's a little bit less. These are a little bit less dramatic. These are definitely less dramatic. I have paintings like the painting right behind me that you can see like the gods at war, right? Right. Yeah. This is a lot of madness going on. This is also a huge painting. We're talking the scale that we talk about, but I'm not showing that sort of work with the art fest here. I'm showing it's almost like if you got a section of this painting, we focus on just a couple individual figures. That's more what I'm sort of sharing, rather than like I'm not selling any like 10 feet paintings. You know what I'm saying? So it's about how I fit them too in regards to the scale, because you're a master of figure drawing, Joe. You know how it is. Like I like to use my shoulders, so I like to use my body when I'm painting too. So I got to get a bigger canvas if I'm gonna put so many figures. So in this case, I don't have so many large full body pieces in this art fest. I'm showing more 30 by 40 inch, that sort of range.
And when Arthur says full body, he means like the full body,
Yeah, I'm gonna show a painting.
Tall.
Actually. Yeah, I want to show a painting that it's the biggest painting I ever made. It's actually in front of me. I'll show that later when we wrap this up a little while.
Well, that's a really interesting shift for you. Then is that reflective of your new surroundings? Is that somehow a presentation of what you're working with in a slightly smaller studio space, or really just a natural movement?
So for me, the primary force that determines all my art decision making is the painting practice itself. So it might be in a smaller studio, but if I need to paint bigger, because that's the challenge of trying to make a painting, my competition being my last painting, right? If I'm trying to make, if I need to outdo that, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bigger scaled work, but if there's something that just bothers me that I need to work on, or if there's something that I just need to excavate, then that's what determines everything for me. So if I need to paint bigger and my studio just can't fit this situation, then I got to figure it out. If that means I need to stretch it on, just hang canvas on the wall, I'll have to hang canvas on the wall. So it's
yeah. And so Arthur, that touches on the eternal question, how do you know when something's done? In your case, with so many layers, it must be especially hard to stop, to say, okay, time for me to, I'm still challenged by this particular whatever it is, but it's time for me to start from a blank, literally a blank canvas. What's that? Is there a pivot point?
I actually know when to stop. This is going to sound, here, let me explain this. So if you imagine 3 eccentric circles, stacked on top of each other that are not stacking. In each circle, one represents symbolism, the other one represents the color harmonies, and the third one represents the gesture and the movement and the mark making. If those are all concentrically stacked for me, then I stop. So that's the way I've explained it before, because it's always difficult for me to answer that, but I realize I need to have some way of articulating that, and I feel like that's an effective and visual reference to explaining how I stop these things. Because if I'm like, okay, there's a lot going on here, you know, you can add too much though, you know. Sometimes you want to show, yes, you want to show the looseness, and people love that. So I'm like, okay, let me let that be. Shows a little bit of, but I will say I do have this addiction towards showcase, you know, really displaying that contrast, whether it's with the color harmony or softness versus more of like an aggressive brush mark. Versus, you know, I do have this attraction towards it, and I think that's a combination from my martial art predilection and my upbringing, and also just growing up in two different cultures and having that awareness of cultural assumptions, and that already has a different type of contrast. So I've always been in that middle space. So even in my paintings, that's come out now, you know?
Well, going back to your analogy of the 3 stacked circles and saying that you know when to stop when basically the circles are aligned, they're never perfectly aligned. You don't want them to be perfectly aligned. You want a little bit of vibration going on. That's true.
There. That's a very good point. Yeah. I'm gonna change what I said with that caveat. They need to be a little. They need to be a little tweaked.
You want somebody to walk by. You need a little bit of vibration to get them.
Yeah. I don't want one perfectly flat wall of color.
But since you brought it up, Arthur, you were also a master of Taekwondo, which is a rather unusual. I mean, talk about a strange hobby for an artist. I'm sorry, but that's at least unusual, if not strange. And you moved from Taekwondo into art. I remember how you explain it. It doesn't seem a natural progression for me. How the heck did that happen?
Well, I've always wanted to be uncommon amongst the uncommon, and in the art world there's you know, a lot of unique, we'll call it, people, right? And what I've done is before, you know, I was practicing painting, but at the same time I was competing in Taekwondo and doing some wrestling, and I ended up winning silver medalist and bronze medalist in the national level. So I'm ranked in that regard, but you know, I had a decision to go into art school or to join the national Taekwondo team. And I mean,
I can see how those two things would have been just side by side.
Well, actually, you'll be surprised. I mean, externally they're so different, but there's actually the disciplinary notion of, like, I use a lot of the same principles on the mat or on the dojo in my studio, actually. And when I had a studio in DC, I got a storefront, and I named it Ronin Studio, because the Ronin, people think the Ronin is just this wandering samurai, but many people don't know that the Ronin was somebody who put down the sword and, you know, towards allegiance towards their masters, because their Ronins are wandering. But many of them picked up the brush and practiced calligraphy or poetry. So I felt like that was analogous to me, because I was a fighter fighting at this national circuit, and then, but now I'm, you know, I'm interested in a deeper, the internal world much more. And I always was, actually. Like, I was just a good fighter, but I wouldn't necessarily say my heart was in it. I always loved painting, but I was just good at knocking people out. But I didn't necessarily enjoy it.
Now you do it with a brush. Well, I say you're feeding me that line so that I can say, now you do it with a brush. Now you're knocking people out with a brush.
That's how we do it. I put down the sword and picked up the brush. That's what we'll say.
Well, Arthur, this has been, I've really enjoyed seeing you. I've really enjoyed this talk, but the timer gods have said that it's time for us to...
Well, I'd like to, before we wrap up, let me show that painting.
Flip your thing around there to show us what you promised earlier.
Sure. Let me flip this camera here. So this is the studio. This is a pretty large painting I was talking about.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, this is like probably 10 feet wide, something of the sort. And what I'm trying to do here is, like, that tiger's life size. If you get close, that tiger is, you know, And here's another thing. You see the woman in the red dress?
Yep, yep.
You get closer to this woman, and inside her red dress will be more figures. I'm sort of trying to stack this, you know? And I'm in New York City, so I can go to the Met. I can see any of these in person. I can really experience it, and that will hit me to the point where I can, it's in my head, you know, it's fresh. And
yes.
I can go, and then I can put these intense color harmonies into the mix here.
That's great to see.
For sure. Actually, sorry.
Now that's your hand, Arthur.
I know.
I don't need to see a close up of your hand.
So this is one of the pieces in the show. This is just a study of the Emperor Nero. Not necessarily a good guy, but I always found him very fascinating in regards to the villainous archetype. I mean, you know, because to me, art isn't just about, you know, beauty. It's about this language and how it can remind us of certain things as well. So this is the layout of my studio here. I do want to show you one more thing here. I got these nice high windows now. Yeah, this is just the kind of language that I'm exploring, right? Putting this multiplicity of figures and has this pop art sensibility of color, because I sort of want to make the sacred accessible in many ways.
Still very bold, all very bold.
Yeah. You know, just doing wild things here. These are all big ones. This one's pretty popular. This is all these figures of war across different cultures. There's this weird scaffolding here. I apologize because I had to hang something up. But yeah, I thought a little studio tour would make it more exciting for the viewers as well.
And nice that you saved it to the end, so they have to wait till the end. But if anybody needs to see more, would like to see more, again, either Arthur's website or our own ArtFest studio that we've set up here are both easily accessible. And thanks again for all the time with this, and come on down sometime when you have time.
I will definitely let you know. Next time I'm down, we're gonna be drawing together, Joe. I appreciate MPA, I appreciate you, I appreciate and I miss everyone in Virginia. So
we missed you down here. Okay, thanks,
right, thanks,
Arthur.
guys. Bye.
Bye. And with me now is Clare Winslow, a participant in this year's 14th annual Art Fest. This year, of course, being the crazy year that it is, it's a virtual Art Fest. And this is a little bit of a virtual, hey, how are you, what's up, kind of interview with Clare. Tell me, Clare, you're of Washington. I mean, you've been I think you took your degrees from Catholic and
yes.
Georgetown, and I know you were involved with the Corcoran as well. So,
yes.
I mean, you're a DC kind of woman.
Yeah, I mean, I call myself a native. We moved here when I was about 4 or 5 or so. But yeah, I did all my schooling here, and my family we grew up on Capitol Hill. So we moved around different neighborhoods in DC, but although I live in Maryland now, I consider myself, really a DC person.
It's all
yeah.
DC. Yeah, it's all DC. And you're still actively teaching. I know that.
Yes. I've been teaching at a variety of places. The COVID-19 kind of altered that a little bit, but
really?
I've kept one hand in with my teaching at Pyramid Atlantic in Hyattsville, which is a place that focuses on printmaking, and then I'm trying to start some online teaching of my own, involving creating online courses, video type courses. That is sort of a bigger project, but I'm chipping away at it by trying to become more comfortable with video and so forth. So I hope that my next step into teaching will be more on the online realm. I do teach it, through Zoom, but this would be less Zoom and more video. So.
Well, the work with Pyramid Atlantic touches on all of your printmaking work, which has to be really, must be why you're doing this transitional shift, or must be why it's so hard to do the transitional shift with printmaking online, because printmaking usually involves at least a little bit of equipment, which not everybody has, and not everybody has a silk screen rack. Not everybody has an etching press. Not everybody, I mean.
Yeah, so what we're trying to do and what I'm trying to do is really hone in on these techniques that can be used at home successfully. And that's a good thing in a way, because although it might take you away from the etching press and the dark room and the screen print equipment, it kind of opens up this other area for people who might not normally have access to a printmaking studio. So if I can kind of, pull in a little bit of that sense of a screen print, but it's not really a screen print. I might be using a gelatin plate, for example, or, there's always linoleum, hand cutting techniques. So we're really sort of going back to hand printmaking techniques, which is nice because it makes it more accessible for a broader audience. And I do like that about that. Sometimes I miss going to using the press because there's really no substitute for that. But there are other interesting hand print techniques that are great to do at home. So that's really been my focus lately.
What's that doing to your work? I mean, for those who may not be familiar, I would encourage you to either go to your website or to our own ArtFest studio that we've set up here to have a look. But your work has such wonderful multiple layers of sometimes translucent colors that I imagine would be different to translate if you're I don't know, doing a monoprint, or maybe that's not the case. Are you learning that the experience of trying to teach at home methods is facilitating your work?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think it does affect my approach to my own work, and it kind of restarts this sense of experimentation again. That, like, every time I teach, I think, okay, I think this is going to go well because I practiced it, but things happen, and in the spur of the moment on your Zoom class, sometimes things go awry, or you realize, like, for example, if I'm using a printmaking ink and my studio happens to be pretty warm that day and I'm in the middle of teaching and I kind of underestimated that the degree of warmness, it affects the ink. And all of a sudden I'm doing a demo and going, you see, it looks like, well, it should look like this other thing that I'm now going to try to show you. So you have to kind of be really flexible. But yeah, it does impact my work because it encourages me to try to incorporate some of those techniques into my painting, for example. I mean, one of my interests is trying to combine printmaking and painting. In the past, that was done by adding some screen printing on top of an acrylic painting. Now there's maybe going to be a little bit less of that, and maybe trying to figure out how to work some sort of hand printing into the painting, for example. But yeah, the teaching and the studio practice are really pretty closely connected. So I don't see them as like totally separate things. And I really am thinking more like teaching is kind of my mission lately. So I really enjoy that. And I think it's good to sort of get outside your own head and your own little studio box and share what you know.
Well, it sounds like you're using your teaching as a tool for your own artistic growth as well. And that's an important differentiation.
Yep.
I mean, I know many people can get caught in a rut of teaching, but it's only a rut if you make it so. If you just keep teaching the exactly same thing over and over again, that doesn't sound at all to be the case with you.
No,
actually, you
yep.
You should be charging. Your students should be charging you, because it sounds like you're learning as much in your teaching as they might be.
Sometimes, yes, what works and what doesn't, and how to stay fluid and flexible, all those things, yes, I learn every time I teach a workshop. So, yeah, I mean, I think if I got to the point where I felt that the teaching was really rote and I was just repeating the same thing and it started to get less than fun, I probably wouldn't do it anymore. But fortunately, there's so much variety in those hand printing techniques that I still have found there's plenty of material to work with and plenty of room to explore. And for example, with the gelatin plate printing that you can do at home, you don't have to use printing inks. You can use golden open acrylics. And so there you bring in sort of something, a painterly tool, and you're combining it with a printed type image. So there's lots to keep me interested and keep things fresh. So.
Teaching online, has that affected the size of the things you're producing?
Yeah, a little bit lately, because last year I had a studio where I could spread out a little bit and work and suddenly work larger, which was really nice for about a year. And since I'm no longer there, I'm back at my home studio, which I feel very fortunate to have, but it's smaller. So I see things, sort of going back down a little bit. And especially with regard to teaching on Zoom, yes, there is a size limit. I mean, maybe 12 by 15 is kind of the biggest. I tend to just demonstrate and show things at 8 by 10 or 11 by 14. And those might be, if I'm thinking of how to translate that into my own work, then maybe those are studies for something bigger, that I'm sort of able to explore an idea at 8 by 10, thinking, okay, later I might do something similar at a much larger scale. But yeah, definitely lately there's a tendency to work a little bit smaller, and that's okay.
That brings up an interesting question. What do you use as a source for your imagery? I mean, when I look at your work, there's always at least a touch of something recognizable. Sometimes it's a big touch, sometimes it's a big hand, sometimes it's two hands worth of, oh yeah, I can see quite clearly that that's drawn from a tree line, or maybe the thing behind you right now, I would say, no, that's drawn from a pond or water. There's something in that. If you're working now in a smaller studio, and using maybe the things that you produce to think larger, does that change your image source? Does your image source become what you're working on now? Or how?
I would say it hasn't changed it dramatically, but in terms of using materials at hand for teaching, for example, there's usually a tendency to use recognizable materials, recognizable imagery, especially if I'm trying to translate to other people what this is. An easy way to teach gelatin printing, for example, is to take botanical leaves from the garden and show how you would ink them and then translate that to a print. So those are things that are just easy for beginners to relate to. So I tend to gravitate toward them. So yes, more recognizable imagery. And I think as I go up in size, I tend to get a little more abstract. And that could just be changing the tools, that maybe I'm switching to big brushes and I feel freer to focus on mark making. If I'm working 8 by 10, there's a little bit of less of the mark making stuff, which is harder to do, and just more, you just need a lot of bang for your buck. What kind of image can I put here at 8 by 10 that's going to have an impact? And it's usually simpler and often more recognizable.
Well, does I need to get off of the topic of COVID, but it's hard to do. Is there anything that you find yourself itching? I mean, now, as you and I are talking, it's been, 6-7 months, and we've been all inside. All of it's been life has been on screen as we are doing now. Do you find yourself saying, if I could only get outside, I would be doing this thing? Or is it a progression? Do you think you'll just open the door one day and say, I know what I'm going to do?
No, I mean, I think everything's sort of gradual with me anyway. There's always ideas percolating. you know, if I'm painting or printmaking, I might also be thinking about, like, I'd really like to be doing ceramics right now, but I trying to stay focused, because, you know, it's like a squirrel, too many techniques, too many things out there to learn. I love textiles. I love printing on fabric and then sewing, embroidering on it, all these kinds of things. But lately I find that I need to kind of try to stay focused. So although I love exploring all kinds of media, I kind of have to pick, you know, painting and printing, and just stick to those right now, because I don't have the bandwidth to do other things. So yeah, I mean, I guess in answer to your question, maybe I would go back to, you know, I'd love to just work really big, much bigger again. And maybe get back to the more textiles, which I just mentioned, more sort of approach to wall hangings rather than paintings, because I have done that before, where I don't necessarily think in terms of a stretched canvas, but maybe I have a big piece of ungessoed canvas and I'm printing and painting on that, and then hanging it up more like a flowing sort of object rather than a canvas. So those are kinds of things that I probably would like to do more of soon.
And when you start stitching, what makes you, some of your work involves a lot of stitching. What directs that as opposed to it ending up being a lot of painting?
I think the stitching, on the one hand, it's kind of a soothing, enjoyable activity, and in terms of creative activity, but also it, if I feel instinctively that the piece needs more, or I want to add more tactility or tactile sense to it. If you're working on a painted canvas, you might add thicker paint, for example, or a drawn line, or something that kind of pulls your eye in or brings some sparkle to the surface. But if you're working with fabric, instead of doing that, the stitching provides a way to get more surface texture, surface tension, whatever phrase you want to use, and just this sense of, like, I want to create something that somebody might want to go touch, even if I might not want to touch it. But yeah, so there's always walking the fine line there. But that's what it adds for me, just more touchability, a sense of touchability.
Well, that's great. Unfortunately, I have to wrap this up because we're on a time allotment here, and I've overused it. But I'm going to encourage anybody who's joined us now, wants to see more of your work, either visit your website or visit our, as I said, our virtual studio. And I'll hope you'll join us live and in person next year in the outside world when we're doing a regular old-fashioned art fest.
Absolutely.
Thank you for all your time and efforts that you put with us this year. I have with me Pat Goslee, who is one of our Art Fest artists for this year. Actually, Pat, you have been with Art Fest before, I think, on a couple of occasions when we were doing live and in person. Remember those days when there, there was open air and everybody wasn't flat on a screen. Pat is of Washington. I couldn't hardly be more involved in the DC art scene. Does wonderful work, which I am real lucky to have a reference to right behind Pat, if everyone looks behind her. Pat does these marvelous layered, they look like they're billions of layers of color, shapes, and forms that are translucent and feed and bleed onto one another. And Pat's going to, if I can get myself to stop talking, Pat's going to tell us about how she makes her work, what it is that you use for inspiration, Pat. And normally I'll start by saying, if you were just passing by quickly, you might not really see the kind of tension that anyone can see if they stop for just a nanosecond, which I think is part of what drives you to make what you make. Yes?
I
That kind
suppose
of,
so, yeah. So a lot of my work is this layering comes from experience with different energy modalities like acupuncture and energy work. And even saying that is a little confusing because it makes it sound like that I begin a piece with a set idea in mind, and I don't. This all kind of evolves, and basically, if you go back and what I was doing when I got out of graduate school, I was very figurative working the same way, not having an idea, but figures would come out. I would see hands first, and I'd sort of pull a figure out of the process. And then I sort of went inside my body, and I got into encaustic for a while and was getting sculptural, and then I had a baby, and the whole melting of wax process didn't really work into a time frame. So I stopped doing that. But one of the things that I did in that process was I was taking some of the material that I was using in the acrylic work and dipped it in paint and kind of did a pressing onto canvas, and that got me thinking in this way of infinity, of going into an astral plane, if you will. And then after I had the baby, we had done some renovation on our house and replaced all the plumbing and all the pipes, which is a pretty involved process, having a little baby. And then finding out that there were lead service lines coming into the house. So that was really a really anxiety-producing moment in my life, to think that I brought this kid into this polluted world. And one of the ways that I dealt with anxiety and also in taking care of him was to work on these little tiny pieces of paper, and I could take I would paint on them to a certain extent, and then I would have them where I could walk around the house with a drawing board and colored pencils, and I could be in the room that he was in. I was like with him, but I was also making work. And the whole lead in the pipes process became, the EPA set up a lab in my house. I was in regular contact with the water experts at Virginia Tech. And it was really ironic is in April of 2018, one of the paintings,
yeah, I love that. I love that.
One of the paintings from that time ended up on the CDC's Emerging Infectious Disease Journal. So
that piece that cover has me though a little suspicious. So I'm thinking, if Pat had a piece 2 years ago on the cover of the Emerging Infectious Diseases publication, maybe I should be watching what she's doing now to see what we're going to be in trouble with 2 years from now. I mean,
well, it's strange. This issue is about antimicrobial resistance.
Yes.
And I actually had an encaustic painting from the 90s of a phage, which is a microbe. It's a bacteria that can actually eat other bacteria. So it's a way you could conceivably attack a bacterial infection with a phage that eats it. And the man that edits this wasn't really interested. I gave him, he asked for some samples, and I gave him a whole bunch of different images, including that phage. And it just so happened that Greg Staley had just been over to my house to photograph some of my recent work. And I'm sometimes not as organized as I should be about documenting my work. And I had some of these paintings that had never been photographed. and I threw them in this pile that Greg was photographing. And so since I had that, I said, oh, here's one. And he ended up picking this, even though it wasn't recent. It was from like 2004. So that's how it ended up on the magazine. I actually thought that he wanted something else of mine. But
so what are you working on now that I should be afraid of it 2 years from now? Or I should say, what did you submit to somebody that's going to be shown soon that I would be afraid of 2 years from now?
Well, I don't know.
You're so good at predicting.
But I'm trying to have like an intentional healing. I feel really uncomfortable talking about it because I've been mocked in the past, and I feel a little bit more comfortable talking about it since people are dying and there seems to be more people that are openly admitting to spiritual aspects of their art making and ideas of healing. I still don't feel 100% comfortable talking about it. But so one of the things I'm doing is I'm using a lot of stencils, which also includes plastic junk that I find in the sidewalk when I'm walking the dog. And so everybody knows what these are, these killed ducks and seals and stuff. So sometimes I string them together and make more intricate patterns that I paint over.
I recognize those from your paintings.
Yeah, and I, it's weird. My painting process is a way for me to deal with stuff going on in the world, and there's just so much disinformation and crazy stuff going on right now. I don't really know if it affects it. I'm constantly finding things when I'm actually working on it. I can't see it. And some of the pieces that I have up now, I'm actually working the same way I did when I found out there was lead in the water. When the pandemic first started, I did the same thing I did before, where I had these small pieces of paper, 9 by 12, and I had painted different layers on them. And then I would go, especially when I found myself being really anxious, I would just like calm myself by actually drawing into them. And sometimes I can't see what's happening when I'm working, and then I actually literally have to like not look at it for a while, and then I'll come back and realize that there are figures in it that I didn't see before, or I didn't see while I was making it, or there'll be a meaning that comes out of it. And some people say maybe I'm too fixated on having a meaning to it, but I really like having an association or meaning to the work that I do. So a lot of these layers of 6-pack rings actually make an X, which is a big question today about gender. And if you happen to have ever read this book, you don't have to read very far, but like page 30, it goes into explaining how important the X chromosome is in determining gender. It's not the Y chromosome, it's the X chromosome. And this is a Pulitzer Prize winning book, and it has a lot more to say about that than I do. But so there's a lot of X's in my work right now that just somehow organically formed from using these things, and also from other stencils that I'm using. I do buy stencils. I cut them myself sometimes. Haven't done much of that recently, but I also find a lot of materials, junk in the street that might have a pattern on it. And sometimes I go to Goodwill and I'll buy up a bunch of like a lace tank top or something that has a nice pattern. I come home and rip it up and spray paint through it. So I use a water-based spray paint. I'm very sensitive to oils and solvents, and so I haven't been using, I sometimes go back and use a water-based oil paint, but mostly
not using any lead-based paints, I'm guessing.
No, latex house paint and acrylic paint and latex spray paint.
Well, all of those meanings, I mean, you're calling them accidental when you're not calling them, but you're suggesting that maybe some of the meaning that's coming through is accidental, but it has to start from the subconscious and whether,
Sure.
And it just happens to manifest itself. It's not quite as accidental as you're suggesting it is. How has the pandemic, do you think, affected you? I mean, you were saying that you're reacting to your environment and news and the like. Have you been isolated? Are you getting more news in a consolidated form, and the reaction is what driving you to the smaller lead-based, or I'll call it the lead era kind of paintings?
Yeah, I'm particularly isolated because I have a really hard time being on social media. I mean, from the get-go, and the first time I ever got on Facebook, I would get off of it. There were just all the things that are supposed to bring us together.
Weren't happening.
Felt like it ripped holes in me. Like I became this big piece of Swiss cheese sitting there. And
so needless to say, isolation for the pandemic has been more isolation than for many.
Yeah.
And with good cause. And that again is what's driven you to the slightly smaller walk around the house executions that you're talking about?
Well, actually, that was at the very beginning of the pandemic. I was one of the first people that I knew of that made a big deal about getting a mask, because not so much that Trump was saying ridiculous things about the virus, but that Rush Limbaugh came out and said, it's just a cold, and the left is going, and I've seen what family members or people that I grew up with who listened to Rush Limbaugh's radio show, and how they got really distorted information, especially about the whole birtherism thing with Obama. I just thought, there's a virus. I don't want to be stuck in the house with no mask. I went out and got a mask. That was in February. And I don't know, I was just, I calmed down a little bit about it. And then I started painting this big, huge painting, which maybe nobody wants big paintings right now. So I'm not, I have done a whole bunch of different, if I spin I don't know if you want me to spin the computer around, you can see different stuff.
Well, we have established a studio, a virtual studio. I have to keep thinking it's a virtual world now, at least this year. We have established a virtual studio where you've uploaded a number of your pieces. And I would encourage people to go have a look at any point. Actually, your work does carry pretty accurately on screen. Some people's work doesn't carry so well, but I think your lovely pieces become more lovely when seen on screen. You can really see that translucency that I was talking about. It really rings true. But yeah, I have to wrap this up because my timer just went off saying that it's going to kick us off here.
I'd just like to mention one thing. This is a t-shirt that I made for
important. Yes.
artwatchdc.com, and I hope you'll consider buying one. It supports League of Women Voters and Rock the Vote, and your life depends on it.
Go vote. Okay. Pat, thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you live and in person, real live human faces, not just this flat stuff that we're looking at now, soon. Thanks for your time, and thanks for your participation in our 14th annual Art Fest.